Good evening, everyone. Jarrett Hubbard, Project Manager with the City of Rochester Administration Department and Project Manager over at Downtown Rapid Transit. Nice to see you all again for another month of our Downtown Rapid Transit webinars. Today, we're going to be a little bit different than the past and even in the future. We're going to take a kind of a big step back today, and instead of talking specifically about Downtown Rapid Transit, we're going to talk about how we got to this point. So we're going to have three small presentations from three different individuals from essentially three different organizations. We're going to start tonight with Brian Law from ROCOG, or Rochester Olmsted County Council of Governments. And he's going to present the long-range plan, transportation plan, the old one and the new one that was just approved this year, and talk about how transit is worked into those plans and how we kind of got to this point a little bit. Then we're going to have a presentation from Ryan Yetzer, a planner with the Community Development Department with the City of Rochester, and he's going to take us a kind of a little deeper dive in the comprehensive plan and really try to tie transit to land use and what that correlation is. And finally, we're going to finish with Bradley Bobbitt, planner with the Rochester Public Transit Agency, and we're going to take a look at Rochester's current transit system, as well as this year is our year to renew our 5-year transit plan, the city's new transit plan. So we'll take a dive into what the last transit plan had and what the new transit plan will be looking like. But otherwise, I just will take a quick second to say hello to everyone and just say, remember we're here because of Downtown Rapid Transit, which is a 2.6-mile bus rapid transit, or BRT for short, line. That means there will be a bus vehicle, but we'll have frequencies and extended service hours similar to what you might experience with light rail. It'll run primarily in the 2nd Street corridor, extending from what is currently Mail's West lot, which will turn into a West Transit Village, all the way over to the Civic Center and Government Center, making a loop around that area and then back onto 2nd Street. Just some housekeeping notes for today. We are taking questions in 2 different ways. We will be taking a pause after each presentation. And if you would like to ask your question live, you can go ahead and raise your hand. And during those pauses or during those times when we have questions, we can go ahead and unmute your mic and you can go ahead and ask your question live over the meeting. If that's not for you, then you can always utilize the Q&A box on the bottom of your panel and go ahead and submit questions whenever you feel, whenever they come to you, and then we'll try to answer those questions during the pauses. So with that, I will go ahead and present Brian Law with ROCOG Metropolitan Planning Organization. Brian.
Thanks, Jarrett. Yeah, we can start by talking about the Rochester Olmsted Council of Government, or ROCOG's Long-Range Transportation Plan, or LRTP, which looks out to 2045 for its planning horizon. So it looks 20 to 25 years into the future. It looks comprehensively at transportation in Rochester and in the rest of Olmsted County, looking at transit, but also active transportation, meaning bicycles and pedestrians, and then also streets and highways. But right now we're going to be looking at how transit is described in the LRTP. And so first, as by way of background, the LRTP takes into account plans for transit that have been included in other plans that have come before it. And most of these plans that are listed here on this slide talk about the importance of densifying the city, growing the density of jobs, people, and residents downtown, especially, but also elsewhere in the city, as a way to make transit and transportation function better for people than it does for cars. And so when we have a denser built environment, you can see on the pictures on this slide how the single occupant vehicle represented on the left takes up the amount of space you can see in that picture. The picture in the middle shows, so the picture on the left shows 40 single occupant vehicles with the driver standing next to it, next to the cars. The picture in the middle shows one bus, a 40-foot bus that can hold about 40 people each, almost all of them with a seat. And that picture is a little bit of a misnomer, because the people that you see standing next to the bus would actually be inside the bus, and they wouldn't be taking up that much room on the street. But then the picture on the right shows pedestrians. Well, it shows people astride bicycles, but bicycles and pedestrians take up a lot less room than anything else. But basically, you can see here that 40 people coming downtown by single occupant vehicles takes up a lot of room on the road. And how can we get people out of single occupant cars and into other modes to come downtown? So that's what's discussed in the plans that are listed here on the slide. I want to go through these kind of quickly, but chronologically, the Downtown Master Plan, which was adopted in 2010, is kind of the major starting point with current planning in Rochester that recognizes the imperative of and the importance of getting people out of single occupant vehicles to the greatest extent we can, and certainly by getting 50% of all commuters to downtown Rochester out of single occupant vehicles. Then 5 years later, when the DMC plan was adopted, it took that same idea of reducing the proportion of commuters coming to downtown in single occupant vehicles, but making it a little bit more aggressive, trying to get it to even lower than 50%, but also coupling that with increasing the share of people who are coming downtown by transit. So if they can get that to grow from the 10% that it is today to 23 to 30% of all commuters coming downtown via transit, that really will make downtown work better. It will make the growth of downtown a lot easier to manage, and for the people that it's growing for to navigate it better. So one big important strategy that was put forward in the DMC plan was the need for some kind of high capacity, high frequency, high amenity transit system that was something more than what currently exists. And this was identified in the DMC plan as the downtown circulator. That project has evolved into the downtown rapid transit that we're talking about tonight. And it was originally conceived to serve three different but interrelated ridership markets. One was peak hour commuters who are driving their car to one of two major parking reservoirs at either end of a route, who could then come into downtown on the circulator. Then the other is to move patients and other visitors in the downtown or St. Mary's area from their lodging to the Mayo facilities that they've come to Rochester for treatment for. And then the third is to move people within downtown during the off-peak periods. So that could be lunchtime during the weekdays for the people who are downtown, but also people who are downtown after work hours and on weekends. So following that, in 2017, Rochester Public Transit adopted their transit development plan, which took into account the need for this, eventually this need for a downtown rapid transit system that could be, and how that would be integrated into the transit system that served not just downtown, but the rest of the city as well. And then in 2018, the city adopted its comprehensive plan, and this plan introduced the primary transit network, which is also conceived to be a bus rapid transit network. But rather than serving only downtown, it would serve the entire city with a couple of, starting off with two major corridors that would stretch the length and breadth of the city through downtown. So it would run parallel with and in conjunction with the downtown rapid transit, and also with the existing Rochester Public Transit neighborhood service. Then the integrated transit studies also they furthered the goals of the DMC plan by trying to come up with ways to implement the DMC plan in these different areas of transit. The city loop, which is a bicycle pedestrian loop that's conceived for surrounding and also going through downtown. Travel demand management, which is a tool that's used to incentivize people to get out of their cars and onto other means of transit. And then the parking solutions that are still going to be necessary even as we de-emphasize single occupant vehicles. there's still going to be parking needs in downtown that need to be addressed through planning. So that brings us to the long-range transportation plan that ROCOG adopted in September of 2020. And it takes into account the transit goals and all these other plans I've talked about, and incorporates them into the larger transportation network throughout the city and the rest of the county. And that plan has a long list of goals. I've sampled a few of them here to give you an idea of how downtown rapid transit and other transit options work toward fulfilling the goals, the regional transportation goals of ROCOG. And you can see in this one, the downtown rapid transit is specifically singled out as an example of how these goals could be furthered. One of the things that is driving a lot of this planning, of course, is the anticipated growth of the city of Rochester, especially employment growth downtown, driven by the growth of the Mayo Clinic. And so this chart is a population chart for Olmsted County and city of Rochester, with a line that shows employment in the area. And you can see it's a fairly stable increase starting in 1990 going all the way through projected growth in 2045. So the growth is expected to be steady. It's expected to continue at about the same rate that it has been for the last 30 years. And so the DMC plan and the downtown rapid transit and other transit planning efforts in this area have really been done as a way to anticipate and plan for as a result of this anticipated growth. Here you can see Olmsted County in the middle of this map and which counties nearby commuters are coming from. Obviously, most of the commuters from outside Olmsted County are coming from the counties immediately surrounding us, but they are coming from even farther away into the neighboring states as well. It shows that there's quite a large commuter shed for employment in Rochester. And so not all of these people are going to be living in the city of Rochester and taking RPT neighborhood routes. They're going to be driving into Rochester, but we want to make sure that they don't park their car downtown. They need to have better options for park and ride and for other solutions like that that can allow them to get the people downtown rather than the people bringing their cars downtown. So that's where the mode share comes in. And if you've been paying attention to these webinars, I know you've seen this graphic before. This is from the DMC plan, and the top picture shows the existing mode share as it was in 2015 at the adoption of that plan. And it shows about 71% of all trips downtown were made in cars, and only 10% were made by transit. In the lower left corner, you see the kind of modest kind of compliance goal where, if DMC growth it happens the way we expect it will, we need to at least get that share of single occupant vehicles down to 50% and transit to increase to 23%. But the DMC plan instituted a little bit more aggressive goals and saying, what if we can get the single occupant vehicle share down to 43% and increase that transit share all the way up to 30%? That's where the downtown rapid transit will really help achieve these goals, because it has the capacity, the larger vehicles and the high frequency of that project would allow for a much greater movement of people to, from, and within downtown than we currently have. But it won't be only the story of downtown rapid transit. It will also be the other parts of the transit system that currently exist and will be added to. So here we have two maps. One on the left is a map from the comp plan that shows the Rochester Public Transit route system as it existed at the time of the comp plan. And basically that's what it looked like pre-COVID. That map also shows areas of potential expansion of the city, which of course means areas that city services would need to expand into, including transit. But you can see that Rochester Public Transit would be a fixed route would be involved. But then on the right side of the slide, you have the ZIPS service area. ZIPS is the dial-a-ride paratransit system that complements the fixed route system. And so these two would still be in operation and would still be a real core part of the transit strategy going forward for the city in the next 20 to 25 years. Downtown rapid transit, that's of course the subject of this webinar. The blue line shows the phase one of this development from the West Transit Village all the way down 2nd Street to the Government Center, library, civic center area where it makes a loop and then returns to the east. There's a phase 2 that would come in as well, heading south to another parking reservoir. That's a phase for later on, and there's still some decisions to be made about that one, I think. Right now, the phase 1 will be the blue line there that will be hopefully it's planned for operation in 2025. And it will be bus rapid transit. I'm sure most people who are familiar with this topic know what BRT is, but briefly, they're typically bigger buses. They're typically 60-foot articulated buses that can hold 60 seated passengers and probably twice that with standees. They typically have their own traffic lanes, or at least lanes where transit is preferred, such as the BAT lanes that are being talked about for the downtown rapid transit. Also, these buses don't stop as frequently as neighborhood service. They stop at usually a quarter mile between stops is kind of the rule of thumb. And the stops are not just stops. They're not just a bus stop sign on the side of the road. They're stations. They're platforms. They have level boarding and things like that. There's really a footprint to these and permanence to these stations. So it helps to mimic and replicate the experience of a rail-based solution, such as a streetcar or light rail, but using rubber tire buses, it allows you to bring in a system like that at about a tenth the cost that you might expect with a light rail system. Another part of the transit system that will be crucial in the DMC plan is the park and ride network. It already exists. RPT runs park and rides so that you can, it already runs a park and ride system, but the DMC plan calls for that to be upgraded, made more expansive, more ambitious, and will grow into areas of the city that are circled on the map on the left. And these would be larger capacity parking facilities, some of them with structured parking, but they would be owned and operated by the city rather than leased from private landowners as they are today. And on the right side of the slide, we have a picture from the comp plan showing the primary transit network, which is a different BRT network, different from the downtown rapid transit. But this is one that would connect nodes of activity in the city with BRT corridors. So you can see them going along north and south on Broadway, east and west on 2nd Street, Southwest, 4th Street, Southeast, and then also eventually on 37th Street North, West Circle Drive, and Valley High Drive. And the circles you see on that are what are called nodes, which briefly are concentrations of residential, business, transportation, retail, and other commercial activities in a sort of a dense spot where it makes sense to serve it with high capacity and high frequency transit. So all of this, of course, is going to bring with it the need for a lot of investment, not just capital investments for vehicles and for stations and other infrastructure, but also for operating. And so here you can see over the course of 25 years how we anticipate the operating costs of continuing RPT's neighborhood service, which exists today, continuing its ZIP's dial-a-ride paratransit, continuing and expanding a more ambitious park and ride service, establishing and then growing at a later date the downtown rapid transit, and finally establishing and growing again the primary transit network throughout the rest of the city. This is, a major investment in transportation that is something that the city has said will help make the city work better for its people. And there are some important complementary strategies to this to the transit work here. One of the most important is travel demand management. An example of this is Arrive Rochester, an organization that was established here a couple of years ago. And what travel demand management organizations do is try to give incentives to people to get out of their single occupant vehicle and instead make their trips using transit, biking, walking, etc. And so there usually it involves like downtown employers who band together to work on some incentives that will get people to at least try making their trip downtown from time to time with a conveyance other than a single occupant vehicle, in the hopes that they will build that into an everyday habit. And also, finally, there are some future technologies that will be coming online, we anticipate, in the next 20 to 25 years that really will kind of revolutionize the way we travel in general, but also the way we do transit. Not least among those that are connected and automated vehicles, which may really transform what transit is, what kinds of vehicles we use for it, and how they operate. But also there's mobility as a service, which is not just about getting people onto the bus, getting them on board a transit vehicle, but it's getting them on board by off-board ticket payment, by scheduling their ride through an app, scheduling a ride, in fact, across several different providers. Maybe their ride can be, maybe the trip they make can be a combination of public and private transportation providers. So there's a lot of different elements to every transit trip that can be streamlined and kind of brought into a one-stop shop through the mobility as a service platforms. So these are two things that we think will be very influential in the coming generation when it comes to delivering transit. So with that, I'll stop and see if there are any questions.
Thank you, Brian. There is a question in the box, in the question box, Brian. If you could take a look at that. While you take a look at that, I will take a second to remind individuals that we are taking questions two ways. One is by the raise your hand feature during these breaks, so where we will try to answer your questions that way, and then through the Q&A box. Brian, have you had the time to look at that question and maybe help answer that one?
I'm seeing is the long-range transportation plan different from the bus rapid transit plan, since the covered areas by the routes and two plans are different? The long-range transportation plan is a ROCOG plan, so it tends to be comprehensive in what it looks at. The bus rapid transit plan, I think this is referring to perhaps the primary transit network as it was described in the city's comprehensive plan. So in that respect, yes, they are separate plans, but they are the long-range transportation plan from ROCOG tries to take the plan like the comp plan and its primary transit network into account, as well as downtown BRT and other transportation. So they're different. They're done by different organizations, but they're done in concert with one another.
Thank you, Brian. We do have a couple of people that raised their hand. So Dan, Barry's on the top of my list here. So if you could go ahead and make Barry, if you could unmute your mic and ask the question.
Hi, yeah, it's sort of a two-part question. One of them is, as a lot of you know, Mayo Clinic has moved about half of its workers out of the downtown with the idea that maybe they would stay removed. Now, as our largest employer, removing some of those workers, have you a model that actually shows if it continues with 50% of the workers not in the downtown, what that would mean in terms of its impact on your long range and your short and middle plans? So that's one part. The other is, I'm wondering, when you say that you need to densify the city in order for the transportation plan to work, what does that actually mean? Do we have to turn into Chicago or New York in terms of the density? Or would there be spot zoning necessary to create that type of density? And can you go into a little more detail about what that would actually mean in terms of the look of Rochester for the future to justify the transit plan? So that's the two questions.
Thanks, Barry. Brian, you want to go ahead and answer? Go ahead. I don't need to answer them all.
Okay, well, I'll try. I think the second question I can take first. I think the transit plan is not the density is not so much to justify the transit plan. The transit plan is being made to deal with the expected growth, and the expected growth is expected to be jobs downtown. And that means the density is coming. And so there needs to be a transit plan to to deal with that. And so I say that it's not so much that we're trying to densify the city to justify having the transit system. It's the other way around. The density is coming, and so we need to plan a transit system that will accommodate that and make it so that the city so the downtown doesn't grind to a halt with all the single occupant vehicles that would otherwise be there. And as for the first part, I think you were asking about does Mayo have plans to kind of disaggregate its employment downtown and instead send a majority of their employees outside of downtown. That is part of what's taken into account with the transit planning. A lot of those areas outside of downtown where Mayo has employees are known, and so they tend to be larger congregations of employees. So what happens then is that those are the places that RPT, for example, will know are coming online, and they will adjust their transit routes to try to get service out to those places as well. And so, but even if certain Mayo functions are leaving downtown and going outside into the rest of the city, that's still going to leave a lot of employment downtown. It's also going to leave a lot of visitors and patients who are still going to be coming downtown. And the transit system we're trying to design a transit system that will work for them as well, not just downtown employees, but for patients and visitors as well.
Yeah, and I would add to that the city is in constant communication with Mayo, particularly on this project and other projects. We are in some intense conversations right now with Mayo about financial assistance, particularly on the operation of downtown rapid transit. And what we've been in our communications with Mayo have not shown that 50% of, it's not 50%, it's much smaller than that. Much more people that can work from home, and that at the same time, those individuals are planned to be service oriented and provide that medical care to the clinic and to its patients. So not only are those expected to fully come back, but also Mayo plans on growing its clinical services. So we have to anticipate the growth that Mayo is planning as well as in offering those clinical services. And like I said, we have a letter that was presented to the City Council back in February, middle of February, and the last time this project was presented to the City Council that still shows Mayo's support in concept for downtown rapid transit. Kurt, I see Kurt, you have your hand raised. Dan, if you could go ahead. Kurt, it looks like if you can unmute yourself, you can go ahead and ask your question.
Okay. Hi. Okay. Hi, Mr. Hubbard. And I have a question. What is the future of Rochester, Minnesota Transit? I know the city is busy with buses and lots of other projects, but I have a question. And of course, as you already know, what is the future of transportation in Rochester, Minnesota, with the RP transit buses coming in 2025? Can you answer that, please?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at trying to answer it now really quickly, real briefly. But yeah, we are as far as transit in the community, we're looking at offering additional types and levels of service, and that's really what downtown rapid transit is. Looking to grow that, and hopefully they'll follow the primary transit network that you heard Brian about, and you'll hear Ryan speak about even more here in a second. As far as the immediate future, we'll get to Bradley here at the end, and he'll talk about the 5-year plan that's going to be conducted this year. So if you have some comments on that one, please stick with us, and you can also get involved with Bradley's long-range the transit development plan. All sorts of little acronyms. I'm trying to say them all so I don't confuse all the people. With that being said, we should keep on moving here. And Ryan, can you go ahead and give us a kind of a preview into the comprehensive plan?
Yeah, thanks, Jarrett. My name is Ryan Yetzer. I am with the Community Development Department for the City of Rochester. And I have been asked to join today and talk a little bit about the comprehensive plan and what the comprehensive plan says about the link between land use and transportation. And on that note, I'm going to throw in my 2 cents on Barry's question. Barry, as for the do we need to become Chicago question, the comp plan calls for a density of roughly 25 persons per acre in order to support a high quality transit system. Currently, Second Street Southwest meets that threshold. So no, my answer to your question would be no. It doesn't mean we have to be Chicago. It means we need to have development similar to Second Street in other areas, in other key transit corridors. But I'll continue going here. So the Rochester Comprehensive Plan was adopted in 2018. The plan is known as P2S 2040. P2S 2040 establishes 7 core principles for the city of Rochester, which are listed below. The first of the 7 core principles is the importance of integrating land use and transportation. Next slide. To build on the 7 core principles, P2S 2040 establishes 21 goals and 91 policies, which begin to define how the city can achieve the planned goals. While there are many goals and policies related to the integration of land use and transportation, I wanted to call out goal number 6, developing node and corridor-based TOD, transit-oriented development opportunities, and goal number 8, accommodate a larger share of urban growth using infill techniques. These goals were key drivers behind the city creating its first transit-oriented development zoning district. Further, these goals strongly support bus rapid transit. Next slide. The next few slides dive into what the comp plan says about integrating land use and transportation. To set the stage, land use and development patterns are fundamentally interrelated aspects of how a city grows and functions, and are critical to both the quality of life and fiscal sustainability. Next slide, please. P2S 2040 presents a lot of concepts to think about around land use and transportation. I've listed a few key ones below. Strategic land use policies can be used to guide development into strategic areas, encourage infill and redevelopment, promote balanced growth, and expand mixed use and density zoning concepts. As for transportation, the city should continue to incorporate complete street principles into all projects, commit to a strategic set of corridors that connect major destinations to downtown through permanent transit services. And while use land use to increase density that will support increased transit services. By doing all of these things, the city can start to manage the travel demand and promote a mode shift. Next slide, please. To further the ideas around the integration of land use and transportation, P2S presents goals that the city should consider around the use of transit investments as a means to shape the city's growth and increase transit use. The key to these goals is the creation of a primary transit network, which Brian touched on earlier, and I'll cover additionally in a future slide. Again, the Rapid Transit project will go a long way toward further achieving these goals. Next slide, please. In the next few slides, I will cover some key maps established in the P2S 2040 document. The first of which is the development vision. This map places an importance on encouraging mixed-use development, supporting compact development, and expanding housing choice. By furthering this development vision, we can begin to achieve our long-term transit goals. Again, this emphasizes the importance on the link between land use and transportation. Next slide, please. This map displays the primary transit network. This map really set the stage for TOD zoning in place today. The areas shown in red were the areas that were rezoned to TOD in 2019. Our hope is that the TOD zoning will increase density in these key corridors over time and allow the city to implement high quality transit service in these areas. The Rapid Transit project certainly helps support the P2S concept. Next slide, please. The last map I wanted to quickly touch on is the stability and change map. P2S 2040 suggests that single family and low density residential areas are unlikely to change over time. On the flip side, underutilized commercial areas, declining shopping centers, empty office buildings, and downtown parking lots are likely to see redevelopment pressures. By having the appropriate land use designation on these lands, the redevelopment of these properties can have a very positive impact on the city's long-term transit goals. This map, as you can see, again, shows the PTN network where the properties were rezoned to TOD in 2019. This map also shows in the orange area surrounding downtown, the areas that guided the implementation of the R2X zoning district, again, with the idea of slowly increasing that density in some key areas. Next slide. Thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions related to the comprehensive plan. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Ryan. This will be another opportunity if someone wants to ask a question live. In the short term, we do have a couple of questions that came on in. One that Ryan and you might be able to help out with a little bit, and that is, does transit-oriented development, or TOD, lead to gentrification? And as the project manager of a TOD document that was completed last year in 2020, one element I would say is historically, yes, transit-oriented development has led to some issues of low-income individuals being pushed out of neighborhoods that they can afford. And so we were very cognizant of that as we went through that study. And we looked at policies to help with that. That includes making sure that future developments in the corridor, particularly the corridor of downtown rapid transit, offer affordable housing, which was part of our document that we looked at that, and as well as making sure that we find ways to address some of those additional issues. Ryan, anything that you might want to add from the community development side of that?
Yeah, no, I think you answered the question properly, Jarrett. It's definitely something that we need to keep an eye on and make sure that we're putting policies in place if that sort of thing is happening. From a zoning side, we can help with that, and we tried to make an effort to help with that through the TOD ordinance by not over prescribing things within the TOD that adds unneeded cost to projects, such that then it turns them into, high-end projects only. So we were cognizant of that. It's something we're certainly watching, and we'll have to keep an eye on as we go.
Thanks, Ryan. One more question, that really this one's for me, so Ryan, you can mute up. Essentially, the question was asking about transit dedicated lanes and what their ability to move additional transit vehicles through the corridor. Downtown Rapid Transit is proposed on using what are known as business access and transit, BAT, business access and transit lanes for most of the corridor. That would allow transit preference. So we would prefer that transit vehicles only use those lanes, but those lanes, and the reason why they're called BAT lanes is because if people can still utilize them for right-hand turns, so right-hand turns into businesses or driveways or even onto side streets. So we have proposed that as part of the project for most of the corridor. I would refer you back to about a month ago, or 2 months ago, we did a whole traffic webinar where we looked at that much more in purposely. I'll put it that way, and we did see that we did have some issues with traffic around the 52 interchange area, and so we responded by we have to remove those transit preferred lanes in that area just because the traffic was too bad. With that, maybe I'll take we'll move on. I see the question came on in, but hopefully our next presenter, Bradley Bobbitt with Rochester Public Transit, can give us maybe if he sees that question, he can start off his presentation with that question. But Bradley is going to kind of run down what current service is with RPT and what the future with the transit development plan may hold for transit. Bradley?
Thanks, Jarrett. Yeah, so again, my name is Bradley Bobbitt. I am with Rochester Public Transit. I work as a project manager and a planner. I also work on day-to-day operations, and I can try to tackle in general terms the question of how will we pay for buses. We get funding both from the federal government as well as the state to help pay for buses and operations through grants. And then we also pay partially for whether it's buses, new facilities, through what's called retained earnings, which is essentially fares. RPT is what's called an enterprise organization, meaning we have our own fund. We're not part of the city's general fund. So we use our own revenues to help pay for those buses. And then again, we have grants, which like the electric buses that were just approved, which are paid for mostly by federal grants. All right, next slide, please. Thanks. So I'm just going to be giving a broad overview of Rochester Public Transit, the services we provide currently. We'll talk a little bit about how those services have been affected by COVID. And then I'll talk about the Transit Development Plan update. As Brian mentioned, the previous TDP was completed in 2017, so it covers a 5-year period, which is up to about now. And then, so it's in need of an update to incorporate changes that have happened since then. Anyhow, so these are, we have 2 services that we provide at RPT. We have our fixed route service, which are the neighborhood routes and commuter bus routes that a lot of people think of when they think of transit. And then we also have our paratransit service called ZIPS, which provides services, door-to-door services for folks who cannot use the fixed route services for any number of reasons. And that is a service that people apply for based on whatever conditions keep them from using the fixed route service. And then we provide what's called demand response. So people set up a ride, we come and pick them up. Generally, it's at least a day before, and then we take them on their trip. Next slide, please. As far as goals, these are actually set in the previous TDP, and we'll be taking a look at them in our update of the Transit Development Plan. But these are meant to support goals in the city comprehensive plan. I know there was a question earlier about the relationship between plans. One way I like to think of it is kind of like nesting dolls, where so the transit development plan, it fits under the umbrella of, it's an implementation plan for the city regarding transit, and it's underneath the comprehensive plan. We are implementing the city's larger goals through how we manage the transit system. So these other goals really flow from the city's higher level goals in the comprehensive plan. Next slide, please. Thank you. This is a view of our current service. The map over here on the left shows the fixed routes that we are currently running. We have 71 buses in our fleet. Those are all 40-footers, although the new electric buses that we're ordering are going to be our first 60-footers, as well as our first electric buses. We have over 600 stops around town and around 70 bus shelters, including the really big ones on 2nd Street downtown to the smaller, mostly glass ones, and even the older ones that are kind of scattered throughout town. Before COVID, we were running 35 weekday routes in neighborhoods for commuter service. That got cut sharply when the state went into lockdown, but we've been bringing routes back. We're currently at 24 weekday routes. For weekends and evenings, we used to run 10, and now we have 6. It's a little bit of a deceiving number because we had a difference between our evening routes and our weekend routes. We had 4 evening routes and 6 weekend routes, and now we use the same routes for both, so we have actually more coverage than we previously did in the evenings. One way we quantify the amount of service we provide is annual service hours, which is basically how long are the buses out there and able to be used for rides. And so we previously had about 110,000 hours annually. If you think about all those 71 buses out there, not all of them are out at the same time, but close to all of them during peak periods are out there. So they're racking up hours. Right now we're at 85,000 hours. So not back to full steam, but we're getting there. We'll actually be adding in some additional routes in June. And those routes are the 417, I believe, the 505 shopper routes, the 501. So we'll be getting some of those service hours back. And then, as mentioned previously, we have our system of park and rides. All of our current facilities are leased from private entities or like the RCTC lot. And so now we have 4, 2 were shut down just because of the loss of ridership during COVID. But we'll be looking at bringing those back as ridership returns. Next slide, please. Here are goals for ZIPS paratransit. A lot of these flow out of the Americans with Disabilities Act, but also are informed by the comprehensive plan. Our biggest goal is to provide comprehensive door-to-door paratransit service that meets the requirements of the ADA. But we also want to monitor our services and our performance, make sure that we're on time and responsive for folks, and that we're efficient in our use of resources. Next slide, please. Thank you. This is the service area for ZIPS paratransit, which was shown previously. It's essentially a big square that's drawn around the city. It's actually pretty large for the size of the city we are. It's beyond the requirements of from the Federal Transit Administration. And we have a fleet of 9 paratransit buses. Next slide, please. So here's a look at our ridership over the last few years. As you can see, before COVID hit, we were actually experiencing pretty significant growth in our fixed route ridership. At that same time, RPT was expanding its services. We added more evening hours in coverage, more weekend hours. And then after COVID hit, our ridership obviously took a very big hit with more folks staying home. And we've been seeing it slowly come back since that initial fall off. Next slide, please. This graph provides a little more detail about that. The blue area is our weekly ridership since March of 2020. You can see the lockdown occur and ridership dropped very sharply. And then it's been coming back steadily with dips around holidays. Right now we're at about a third of what we typically experienced at the beginning of 2020 before everything shut down. That gray area in the back shows kind of the seasonal pattern of transit ridership that just occurs every year. That information is from 2019, just so we had a complete year of data before looking at COVID. Next slide, please. This is our ridership on ZIPS, a little bit different in that we were experiencing some declining ridership on ZIPS. And that's something we'll be looking into as part of the transit development plan update. And then again, COVID hit and ridership took a very strong dip. Next slide. Thank you very much. So I'm going to move on to talking about the transit development plan now. Next slide. So as I mentioned earlier, it's essentially a 5-year implementation plan. It also covers the next 5-year period to have kind of a roadmap, but as we get further out from today's date, it makes it harder and harder to plan in detail. So once we get past that initial 5-year period, things become a little more general. But that's essentially what the transit development plan is. It implements the policies and strategies of the comprehensive plan. We also plan for future changes in demand, whether that's from changes in behavior, people, whether it's working from home more, or if it's mode shift that's occurring, changes in preferences, or if it's growth in different parts of the city that we haven't been serving before. And then finally, it's an opportunity for us to engage with the community and get robust feedback on the operations and management of their transit system. Next slide, please. So this slide just shows the kind of major topic areas that were covered in the last transit development plan. And I wanted to just show it to show how much work goes into the TDP. There's a lot in there. We take a look at our overall goals and objectives, but we also look at how has the community grown and changed since the last transit development plan. We look at our current service, how it's performing for our own performance measures, as well as compared to peer cities, which have similar population sizes and employment bases, which is actually pretty difficult to find for Rochester. We always give a summary of our public engagement efforts. We have our implementation plan for how we're actually going to do the ideas and strategies that are identified in the plan, the capital assets, so any additional stops, garage facilities, buses that we need to implement that plan. We look at our staffing levels. The last TDP supported additional staff, which is why I'm here presenting to you now. And then we look at our expected revenues, grants, funding from the federal government, et cetera, and how that will support our service. And then finally, we always do a Title VI analysis, which refers to the Civil Rights Act. And that's, we always have to ensure that we're not having disproportionate burdens or impacts on any group protected under the Civil Rights Act with our transit service in terms of not serving groups equally. Thank you. For the next slide. So these are just some highlights of what was in the last TDP. As I mentioned, supported some additional staff. Also talked about high frequency corridors and expanding hours of service. That relates back to the primary transit network a bit. We also looked at simplifying our routes. Previously, we had one route that, or we had single routes that would have lots of different versions depending on the time of day. And the recommendation from the last TDP was to have just one route that was the same throughout the day. We haven't been able to implement that expansion completely because we were about to do that when COVID hit. And so we've been doing it more piecemeal. Recently, we renumbered our routes, and we've been implementing some of the new routes. And that's something we've been kind of taking on the fly as things have changed. And we've already talked a little bit about, it was talked previously about the need for expanded park and ride system. That was also covered in the last transit development plan. Next slide, please. So I've already talked about a few of these, but a lot has happened since 2017. We've added capacity for additional buses at our garage, and we've expanded our fleet. We've added new staff. We have those new electric buses that we're ordering. We're also working on designing the first city-owned park and ride, which will be up at 75th Street Northwest on the north end of town. There have been big developments with Destination Medical Center, part of the city, Discovery Walk, the Rapid Transit Project, which is going to be a big deal for us. And I'll talk a bit more about how the next TDP will be looking at that and how it relates to RPT's operations. And then finally, as we talked about COVID-19. Next slide, please. So as far as updating the 2017 TDP, where we're at with it now, we have published a request for proposals. We've invited consultants to take a look at our request in terms of the outcomes we want for the transit development plan, what topics we want to look at, what approach we want to take. And then they will be providing their proposals in the near future. And we're hoping to select a consultant to help us with completing that work in June. And the project, we're expecting it to take a year, maybe a little bit longer, depending on how things go, particularly with COVID and trying to do public engagement. That may lengthen the project out a bit. Next slide, please. In broad terms, what we're looking to do and what's in that RFP we're looking to build off the work of the last transit development plan. We put a lot of emphasis on community engagement. We're asking that the consultant use a co-design or advisory group process similar to what's being done for rapid transit, along with other more typical efforts that have been done in the past, surveys. If we can do any sort of engagement events, that'd be great. Online open houses, that sort of thing. Another thing we really want to stress is that integration with city plans. So serving the overarching goals in the comprehensive plan, looking at what's coming down the pipe with the long range transportation plan from ROCOG, that sort of thing. And then we have these kind of special topic areas that includes the rapid transit project. In particular, we're going to be looking at, the agency finances, what our operating budget will be, how that will change, if we'll have need for additional staff to help run the rapid transit line. We're also going to be looking at fleet electrification, which relates to the rapid transit project, resiliency planning, and kind of how we come back from COVID-19. We're also going to be taking a look at those 600 plus bus stops around the city and trying to create some standards for levels of service based on the type of route, the demand, et cetera. And then we'll be taking a look at our fare structure, which hasn't been updated for quite a while, to see if there's any changes needed there. Finally, we want to keep that look a little bit beyond the 5-year period so that we're not, just cut off right when we get to the end of the next 5-year period. So there's a little bit of a roadmap of what comes next. And we want the document to be accessible to the general public in terms of how it's written. We want it to be user-friendly. So that's what we've asked consultants to think about when developing their proposals for us, and something we're going to be looking for in how we create this plan. Next slide, please. And that is all I had. So we can take questions if there are any.
Thank you, Bradley. At this current moment, we have no questions that have come on in, or all that have come on in, we've tried to go ahead and answer. I'd take a second and remind people that you can go ahead and submit your questions via the Q&A box or by raising your hand. It looks like Barry does have a question. Dan, if you can go ahead. Oh, there he is. Dan is quick. Barry, if you can mute yourself, you can go ahead and ask your question.
Okay, two quick questions. When I was involved with the transportation planning about 5 years ago, we talked about buses going to the airport, Olmsted History Center, and Quarry Hill. Is there any progress specifically about going to those spots? And my other question, I'm not sure if you're involved in this or not, I'm a little concerned about the automatic bus because it only goes 10 to 15 miles an hour. And I'm just afraid it'll slow down traffic on Broadway enormously and create a lot of problems for the people in terms of the slowness of it. I'm just wondering if you could comment on doing something to make sure that doesn't happen. That's going to start this summer.
Yeah, Bradley, can you go ahead and answer kind of the first question about kind of the status of some of those routes?
I'll take a shot, and I might ask Brian to help out as well. So that was something I think that was talked about in the last TDP. In general, the service expansion was put on hold when COVID hit. I think it's still part of kind of the general idea of what expanded transit service will look like, and it's something that will definitely be looked into as part of this TDP update. As far as the current status, we're mostly focused on bringing back neighborhood routes as we can, as either, through that kind of combination of looking at what's the risk level, what's our funding looking like, what's the demand, how many drivers are we able to keep on hand. There's a lot of factors, but that's our current focus as far as routes and bringing them back. And then could you restate the second question? Sorry. Thanks, Barry.
Wait, can you hear me?
We can hear you now. Yeah.
Okay. The other question had to do with the automatic shuttle, the mini bus that council just approved that on Monday, and it only goes like 10 to like 15 at most miles an hour. And if you run that on Broadway with all of those the traffic, it's just going to slow down things even more. And I'm just worried if it'll create accidents when it turns, and and it might impact pedestrians trying to cross because it's so slow that I'm just worried it'll just muck up traffic even worse than it is. If you're going to be monitoring that, and what you're going to do to make sure the traffic flows a little smoother on that road on Broadway.
Jarrett, would you like to tackle this, or would you like me to take a crack?
Actually, Nick says he would like to take a crack at this question. Nick, if you're available.
Well, sure. Yeah. Nick Lemmer, communications coordinator for the city. I was involved in some of the early planning. This is a MnDOT project, as you know, Barry, that's being done in partnership with the city and DMC, and First Transit is operating the vehicles. But if you tuned into the city council meeting Monday, this question was asked, and Dylan Dombrowski, our assistant Public Works Director, addressed it by saying that the speeds of the traffic in the downtown corridor where this will be running are quite low already, because almost every intersection is a signalized intersection. And so in some respects, he didn't expect he and the other traffic engineers who did the analysis of the route did not expect that this would have either adverse effects on the traffic or on this or of the safety of people happening along Broadway Avenue. That said, they're of course monitoring it very closely. That's the purpose of this pilot program, is to monitor it closely and analyze its performance in traffic and analyze those objects. So it's all going to be watched very closely. Thank you for the question.
And we did have a couple more questions come on in. Brian, I'd turn your attention to the question about Amtrak to see if you have any thoughts on that. But I will take a stab at the DMC. DMC is a organization that's in line. One, it's Person Economic Development Association that's responsible for the economic development drivers of downtown Rochester. And then additionally, the DMCC Corporation Board was created to oversee the state funds that is associated with the Destination Medical Center initiative, of that includes transportation funds. But specifically, DMC does not oversee the day-to-day management or day-to-day operations of any transportation or transportation elements. That would be entirely the city and Rochester Public Transit. And then with a few exceptions, with a few situations, I guess you could also say MnDOT is involved with US 52 and 14. And as well as we're going to do that, we might as well quote Olmsted County for the roads that come into the city as well. But as far as the day-to-day operations, DMC is not involved in any of that. Brian, you have any thoughts on Amtrak real quick before we run?
Yeah, I can't really speak for the city on this, but the question asked, what does the city think about Amtrak's train going around Rochester, Minnesota to the Twin Cities with RTP after the 2022 election? I don't understand the election reference, but as for Amtrak expansion, that was brought up as a possibility with the federal stimulus, the transportation stimulus plan a few weeks ago. And I think the thing that got people excited about that was the expansion of Amtrak services into areas that may currently not have Amtrak service. Rochester is one of those, but what makes Rochester different from, say, Eau Claire, Wisconsin, or some place like that is that right now there's really no infrastructure in place to bring passenger rail through Rochester, Minnesota. The rails that come through here are freight, and there hasn't been passenger rail in Rochester for a long time. So a lot of the expansions that were shown on that map were places that had passenger service much more recently than Rochester has. So some of that infrastructure and right-of-way is actually, some of the infrastructure is still in place, some of the right-of-way is still intact. And in Rochester, that's just not really the case right now. So I think the prospects of getting Amtrak service into Rochester in the next decade or so are, I think they're slim, but it's not to say we shouldn't work toward it, but I think it'd be a big lift right now.
Thank you, Brian, for taking the stab at answering that question. And I would say that's kind of the way the city sees it. Is we would love to see that service make its way to Rochester right now, but we don't see it happening anytime soon. So we will continue working with our federal legislative members and other federal agencies to see if to make that happen in the long-term future. With that, we need to start to close up here. Dan, if you can scroll to the next slide. I just want to take a second here and say not only did we want to take this session to really talk through and where bus rapid transit came from and downtown rapid transit came from and where we're going, but we also wanted to kind of take the time to show you that it's more than just transit. It's land use, it's zoning, and it's long-term planning and even short-term planning that goes on into it. So here you can see some of the images that actually came out of the Transit Urban Development Study last year. But ROCOG gets involved with vehicles, cars, and buses, and starting to create guides and outlines for the city and the county to follow when it comes to that. such as the PTN in the network. Then RPT is taking care of the current our day-to-day service here in town, and as well as RPT will be responsible for bus rapid transit once it begins here in 2025. And finally, that connection to land use and how if we do this right and tie land use and transportation together, we can really turn what are some of the vacant parking lot sites in downtown into real usable sites that really help create and advance the long-term livability goals that both the city and the DMC have for the city. So with that, I will thank you all again for attending. I want to say we talked about a lot of plans and a lot of acronyms, so I tried my best to stay out of the acronyms, but just talk about the plans. If you visit the Rapid Transit website, that is here on the screen, rochestermm.gov/rapid transit, and you click on Project Library on the left-hand panel screen, you will see a list of all the documents that we talked about tonight and access to read more and get more information on those. As always, you can reach out to us by our email or by our phone number. The email is rapidtransit@rochestermm.gov. That's rapidtransit@rochestermm.gov, or 507-328-2025. We have already gone ahead and posted the webinar for next month, which will be on May 25th. And that will be the focus on station architecture. And that will be an opportunity for the community to get their first eyes and start to think about and comment on the work that's been going on with the co-designers on what the stations look like and how with those station platforms, how they're going to be laid out and accessed. So I encourage you all to go to the website right now, rochestermm.gov/rapid transit, and go ahead and register for the May webinar. And then in June, we will take the time to look at the environmental findings, which is a part of the federal process. We are still expecting to receive 49% of our funds for rapid transit through the federal government. And as part of that, we have to follow their environmental process. So with that, I'll just take one more time to say thank you very much. Have a good night. And please visit the website and give us a call or email when you get the opportunity. Really appreciate it. Thank you very much. Have a good night.